Welcome. Find a comfortable position, somewhere you can truly settle. Let your shoulders drop, allow your breathing to deepen, and prepare to step back through the centuries with me tonight. We're going to explore a world that moved at a different pace, slower, quieter, more deliberate. A world where the production of a single book could consume years of a person's life. Imagine yourself in medieval Europe, in those long centuries between the fall of Rome and the rise of printed books. In this world, knowledge was precious, rare, and laboriously preserved by hand. Every book, every manuscript, every copy of scripture or classical text existed because someone sat hour after hour, day after day, carefully forming each letter with pen and ink on prepared animal skin. Tonight, we'll enter the scriptorium, the writing room of a medieval monastery. We'll experience the reality of a scribe's daily existence, the physical toll of their work, the precise rituals of their craft. Later, we'll witness the terror that descended upon one such monastery when Viking raiders arrived. We'll examine the mysterious beauty of illuminated manuscripts, and finally, we'll explore the intellectual world of cathedral schools, where the next generation learned to read, debate, and preserve the knowledge of ages past. But first, the scriptorium. The quiet room where words were born onto pages, one careful stroke at a time. The bell rings for prime, the first office of the day, while darkness still holds the world. You rise from your narrow bed in the dormitory, your joints stiff from the cold, and the thin straw mattress beneath you. The stone walls around you have held the night's chill, and your breath mists in the air as you dress in your habit. Within the hour, you've attended prayers, broken your fast with bread and weak ale, and made your way through the monastery's corridors to the scriptorium. The scriptorium occupies a room on the south side of the monastery, positioned to catch what sunlight the day might offer. This morning, as most mornings, the light is thin and grey, filtering through windows of oiled parchment or, if your monastery is wealthy, small panes of thick, uneven glass that distort the world beyond. The room is long and narrow, with a row of wooden desks arranged beneath these windows. Each desk is a scribe's world, his workspace, his burden, his daily reality. You take your position at your assigned desk. The wood is worn smooth by decades of use, marked here and there with ancient ink stains that no amount of scrubbing could remove. The desk is angled, sloping slightly toward you, designed to hold the manuscript at the proper position for writing. Before you sits the page you began yesterday, a sheet of vellum, precious and irreplaceable, already bearing several lines of text in your careful hand. Imagine yourself settling onto the hard wooden stool. There is no back to this seat, nothing to support you. You must hold yourself upright through sheer discipline and habit, your spine straight, your shoulders squared. Within minutes, you already feel the beginning of that familiar ache between your shoulder blades. The scriptorium is quiet. Silence is the rule here, as in most parts of the monastery. Speech is permitted only when absolutely necessary, and then only in whispers. The rule exists partly for spiritual discipline, silence as prayer, silence as separation from the world, but also for practical reasons. A scribe must concentrate absolutely. A single moment of distraction can lead to an error, and errors in sacred texts or important documents are serious matters. Around you, perhaps a dozen other scribes sit at their own desks. You hear the soft scratch of pens on vellum, an occasional creak of a stool, the rustle of a page being turned in an exemplar, the book being copied. Someone coughs quietly, the sound quickly suppressed. The silence feels heavy, present, almost tangible. It presses on you as the hours unfold. The manuscript before you is a gospel book, a copy of Matthew. You have been working on this single book for 7 months now. If you maintain your current pace, if your health holds, if you make no serious errors, you might complete it within another 5 months. An entire year of your life will be absorbed into this one book. You pick up your pen, a quill carefully cut from a goose feather. The shaft has been trimmed, the natural curve removed, the tip shaped with your penknife into a precise nib. This particular quill has served you for perhaps 3 days, but it's beginning to wear. You can feel the slight roughness as it moves across the vellum, a tiny resistance that wasn't there yesterday. By tomorrow, you'll need to cut a fresh one. Before you begin writing, you examine the vellum page. Vellum itself represents weeks of labor performed by others. The slaughter of a calf, the soaking of its skin in lime water to remove the hair, the stretching on a frame, the scraping with a curved blade to thin it, the rubbing with pumice to smooth the surface. Each page is the sacrifice of an animal, treated with such care and skill that it has been transformed into something that might last 1,000 years. The page has been ruled already, lines scored faintly into the surface with a sharp stylus and a straight edge. These lines will guide your writing, ensure that each line of text is straight and even. You've pricked tiny holes along the margins and used them as reference points for the ruling. The process of preparing pages for a book is itself time-consuming work, often done on winter evenings when the light is too poor for writing. Now you dip your pen into the inkhorn fixed to your desk. The ink is black, made from oak galls, those round growths that form on oak trees where wasps have laid their eggs. The galls were collected, crushed, mixed with iron salts and gum arabic, then left to ferment and mature. The result is an ink that flows smoothly but dries quickly, that bonds with the vellum and resists fading. You've made this ink yourself, following the traditional recipe, adjusting the proportions until the consistency satisfied you. The first stroke of the day. Your hand moves across the page, forming the opening letter of a new line. The letter I, elegant in its simplicity, in principio, in the beginning. These words you know by heart, having copied them dozens of times in various books, but you don't rely on memory. Your eyes move constantly between the exemplar propped on a stand beside you and the page before you. You read a few words, hold them in your mind, then write them. Read, remember, write. Read, remember, write. This is the rhythm of your days. Your hand is already beginning to cramp. After years of this work, your fingers have developed permanent calluses where the pen presses against them. The muscles of your hand, your wrist, your forearm are overdeveloped on one side, giving you a subtle asymmetry. Your thumb aches perpetually from gripping the pen, a dull throb that you've learned to ignore. The cold seeps into you. Even in summer, the stone walls retain a chill. In winter, the cold is a constant companion, an enemy that stiffens your fingers and makes the ink sluggish in its horn. Some scriptoria have fireplaces, but fire is a terrible danger in a room full of irreplaceable manuscripts. Most scribes simply endure the cold, wrapping themselves in extra layers, tucking their free hand inside their habit to keep the fingers warm and flexible. Today is spring, but spring in Northern Europe is not the warm season you might imagine. The window beside you admits light, but also drafts. You feel the cool air moving across the back of your neck, raising gooseflesh along your arms. You hunch slightly forward, trying to retain your body heat. But this creates a worse angle for your back and shoulders. You force yourself to straighten again, accepting the cold. An hour passes. The light strengthens slightly as morning progresses. You've completed perhaps 8 lines of text. Each letter must be formed perfectly, the proper height, the proper width, the proper spacing. Consistency is essential. If you drift, if your letters begin to vary, the entire page looks unbalanced. Readers in future generations, readers you will never know, should not be able to detect where you paused for dinner or picked up work on a new day. Your eyes burn. You've been focusing on close work in inadequate light since dawn. The black ink on pale vellum creates a harsh contrast that strains your vision. Many scribes suffer from chronic headaches and failing eyesight. You've seen older monks squinting at their work, holding the page closer and closer as their vision deteriorates. Some eventually lose the ability to read at all, their eyes exhausted by decades in the scriptorium. The text before you is Latin, the language of the church, the language of learning. You understand what you're copying, more or less. Years of education, years of participating in the daily offices, have given you a working knowledge of Latin. But understanding isn't really the point. You are not here to interpret or to think deeply about the words. You are here to copy, to reproduce, to serve as a human instrument transferring text from one page to another. Sometimes, though, understanding brings its own burden. You're copying a passage about suffering, about martyrdom, and the words press on you as you write them. You think about the saints who died for their faith, about the reality of that suffering. But you push these thoughts away. Contemplation has its time, in private prayer, in the chapter house during readings. Here, in the scriptorium, your mind must remain focused on the mechanical task of copying. A fly lands on your page. You freeze, not daring to wave it away while your pen is still wet with ink. The fly walks across the vellum, its tiny legs leaving no mark, and finally departs. You release your breath slowly. An ink smear, a careless movement, and weeks of work could be ruined. Vellum can be scraped clean and reused, but the process damages the surface. Too many corrections on a page, and it becomes unusable, a waste of precious material. Another hour. Your back is screaming now. The pain has localized into a burning point between your shoulder blades, and another just above your hips. You shift your weight on the stool, trying to find a position that offers relief. There is none. You've learned that the only way through the pain is to endure it, to acknowledge it, and then set it aside in your mind, focusing on the work. The rule of silence weighs on you. There were times, early in your novitiate, when you wanted desperately to speak, to share a thought or ask a question. Now, after years, the silence has become natural, even comfortable. Your thoughts run along well-worn channels, prayers and memorized passages mixing with observations about the work. You notice that the ink is flowing slightly too thick today. Perhaps the air is more humid than usual. You'll need to add a few drops of water to the inkhorn at the next opportunity. The bell rings for terce, the third office. You carefully set down your pen, wipe it clean on a rag kept for that purpose, and rise from your stool. Your legs have stiffened from sitting. You walk stiffly from the scriptorium with your brothers, down cold corridors to the church, where you'll chant the office and then return to work. After prayers, there's a brief interval. You take the opportunity to visit the necessarium, the communal latrine, and to drink some water from a pitcher kept in the cloister. Your throat is dry from breathing the dusty air of the scriptorium. Then back to your desk, back to your stool, back to the endless lines of text. Midday approaches. The light is at its strongest now, though clouds dim it periodically. When a cloud passes before the sun, you must pause, waiting for the light to return, unwilling to risk making an error in semi-darkness. These pauses are small mercies, moments when you can rest your hand, close your eyes briefly, roll your shoulders in a futile attempt to ease the tension. You think about the book you're creating. 12 months of your life transformed into a single volume. This book might outlast the monastery itself. It might be copied in turn by other scribes in distant monasteries. It might be read by saints and scholars whose names are not yet known. This thought brings some consolation. Your labor, invisible to the world, has purpose and meaning. You are preserving God's word, maintaining the chain of knowledge that reaches back to the apostles and forward into an unknown future. But there's also frustration, a feeling you try to suppress. The work is numbingly repetitive. The same letters, the same words, the same passages copied over and over. Your mind rebels sometimes against the tedium. You find your thoughts wandering, and you must drag your attention back to the page. When your attention wanders, errors creep in. You might skip a word, repeat a phrase, misspell something. Each error must be caught and corrected. You notice an error now. 3 lines back, you've written Deus where the text should read Dominus, God instead of Lord. A significant mistake. Your heart sinks. You'll need to scrape away the incorrect word with your penknife, being careful not to damage the vellum more than necessary, then write the correct word in the space. The correction will be visible if you look closely. A slight roughness in the surface, a minor variation in the ink. You make a mental note to be more careful, to check each line before proceeding to the next. The bell rings for sext, the 6th office. Already half the day has passed. You've completed perhaps 2/3 of a page. At this rate, a full page takes you roughly a day and a half. The Gospel of Matthew contains approximately 80 pages. Simple arithmetic, depressing arithmetic, tells you that this book represents more than 120 days of writing time, not counting preparations, corrections, illuminations, if any, and binding. After sext comes dinner, the main meal of the day. You file into the refectory with the other monks and take your place at the long tables. Food is served: bread, pottage made from beans and vegetables, perhaps a bit of cheese. If it's not a fast day, there might be fish. You eat mechanically, barely tasting the food. Someone reads aloud from a religious text while you eat, the words washing over you. The rule of silence continues even at meals. You chew, swallow, and think about the afternoon's work ahead. Back in the scriptorium, the light is already beginning to decline. The best hours for writing are morning hours, when your eyes are fresh and the light is strong. Afternoon work is harder, more prone to error. You dip your pen and continue where you left off. Your fingers are cramping badly now. You've been gripping the pen with varying degrees of tension for hours, and the small muscles of your hand are exhausted. You flex your fingers, trying to restore circulation, but it helps only briefly. The penknife rests nearby, ready for sharpening the quill or scraping away errors. It's one of your most important tools, kept sharp and clean. The vellum before you is expensive, beyond imagining to those outside the monastery. A single sheet represents substantial resources: the calf, the labor of preparation, the time of skilled craftsmen. If you were to ruin this page beyond redemption, it would be a minor scandal. Resources are always limited, even in wealthy monasteries. The tension of working with such precious material never entirely leaves you. You continue writing. The letters flow from your pen in their measured procession, E-T-I-A-M, and also S-E-D, but Q-U-O-N-I-A-M, because Latin word by Latin word, phrase by phrase, the text grows. Your hand moves across the page, reaches the margin, drops down to the next ruled line. Your eyes move from exemplar to page, an endless dance of attention. The light is fading now. It's late afternoon, and the sun, when it appears between clouds, hangs low in the sky. The light in the scriptorium grows dimmer, more uncertain. Some scriptoria have candles or oil lamps for evening work, but many do not. Open flames and irreplaceable books make poor companions. As the light fails, you feel a mix of relief and frustration. Relief because your body screams for rest. Frustration because you haven't finished as much as you'd hoped. The bell rings for none. The 9th office. You set down your pen, clean it carefully, stopper your inkhorn. Your page has advanced perhaps another 1/3. Tomorrow, you'll complete it, if fortune allows. You rise from your stool, your body protesting every movement. Your back is rigid with pain. Your neck feels locked in position. Your hand cramps as you try to straighten your fingers. You follow your brothers to the church for prayers, then to the refectory for a light supper. Evening brings vespers, then compline, the final office before sleep. Between offices, there's time for private prayer, for necessary work, for a brief period of recreation where conversation is permitted. Tonight, during recreation, you mention to a fellow scribe, in low tones respectfully, that your back troubles you more than usual. He nods sympathetically. Every scribe knows these pains. He suggests a particular prayer, a particular posture for sleeping. These small remedies are shared knowledge among your brothers. Some scribes rub their hands with warmed oil before bed, trying to soothe the chronic inflammation. Others perform stretching exercises, learned from older monks who've survived decades in the scriptorium. Eventually, you return to your cell or dormitory bed. You lower yourself carefully onto the thin mattress, your body exhausted, but your mind still active. You think about tomorrow's work, about the errors you need to correct, about the pages still ahead. Sleep comes slowly, and when it comes, it's often shallow, punctuated by aches and pains that rouse you briefly before you slip back into dreams. This is your life. Day after day, month after month, year after year, the rhythm never changes significantly. Seasons bring variations, summer's heat and better light, winter's brutal cold and long darkness, but the essential pattern remains. You sit, you write, you endure the physical cost of your labor, and this cost is real, substantial, undeniable. Medieval scribes suffered from a constellation of occupational ailments. Chronic back pain was nearly universal, caused by hours of hunching over desks without proper support. Neck pain accompanied back pain from holding the head in a fixed position. Hand and wrist problems, what we might today call repetitive strain injuries, were endemic. Eye strain led to headaches, failing vision, sometimes blindness. The cold in unheated rooms caused arthritis, particularly in the hands and fingers. Some scribes developed respiratory problems from breathing dust particles from the parchment and from the pigments used in illumination. The exemplars you copy sometimes contain marginal notes left by previous scribes, little complaints and observations written in moments of weakness or frustration. These marginal comments, called colophons, survive in manuscripts held in libraries and archives today. They offer brief glimpses into the reality of a scribe's experience. One scribe wrote, "Writing is excessive drudgery. It crooks your back, dims your sight, twists your stomach and sides." Another complained, "3 fingers write, but the whole body suffers." Yet another, with dark humor, "He who does not know how to write supposes it to be no labor, but though only 3 fingers write, the whole body labors." Some comments are simple expressions of relief. "Thank God it will soon be dark," or "The end of the book, thanks be to God." Others include requests for prayer. "Pray for the scribe, his hand is tired." One manuscript contains the plea, "O you who turn these pages, keep your fingers far from the text, for as hail ruins the harvest, so does a careless reader destroy the book and writing." Physical complaints appear frequently. "Writing is hard work, it hurts the back. New parchment, bad ink, difficult exemplar. A curse on thee, O pen." One scribe, reaching the end of a long text, wrote, "As the sailor rejoices when he sees his home port, so does the scribe when he sees the end of his book." These brief cries of frustration and pain, scratched into margins over the centuries, demonstrate the human cost of manuscript production. Behind every surviving medieval book stands a scribe who suffered for its creation, whose back ached, whose eyes burned, whose fingers cramped, whose life was measured out in carefully formed letters. Not all scribes were monks, of course. In larger towns and growing cities, professional scribes worked in commercial scriptoria, producing books for sale. University towns developed active markets in manuscript books, with scribes working on commission for students and scholars. But monastic scriptoria remained the heart of manuscript production throughout the medieval period, particularly for religious texts, and the conditions in these monastic writing rooms shaped the experience of most scribes. The scriptorium, where you labor day after day, is more than a room. It's a battlefield where the war against time and entropy is fought letter by letter. Every book copied is a victory against the loss of knowledge. Every manuscript preserved is a bridge between past and future. And you are the bridge builder, sitting in the cold, in the dim light, in silence, in pain, forming letters that will outlive you by centuries. Imagine yourself there now at your desk in the quiet room with its rows of hunched scribes. The afternoon light fails. Your hand aches. Your back is aflame with tension. Your eyes can barely focus, but the work continues. It must continue. Tomorrow, you'll return to this desk, to this page, to this endless task. And the day after, and the day after that, for as long as your health and eyesight hold, for as long as you remain capable, you'll sit here forming letters. This is what it was really like to be a scribe, copying manuscripts in a medieval monastery. Not romantic, not peaceful, not an escape from the hardships of life. It was itself a hardship, demanding sacrifice, endurance, and dedication. The beautiful books that survived from this period, those treasures in museum collections and library vaults, were born from this suffering, created by hands that cramped, and eyes that strained, and backs that ached without relief. As you drift towards sleep tonight, in your own bed, in your own time, you might spare a thought for those scribes, for the men who sat in cold rooms, decade after decade, preserving the texts that formed the foundation of European learning. For the anonymous laborers, whose names are mostly lost, but whose work remains, speaking silently across the centuries. The rhythm of their lives continues in the books they left behind. Each page a day of labor, each book a year or more of dedication. Each letter a small victory of human will over the blank vellum, over the passage of time, over the forces of decay and loss. The scriptorium we've just left, with its quiet rhythms and patient labor, existed in a world that could seem almost timeless. Seasons turned, generations of monks came and went, but the work continued. The copying of manuscripts, the preservation of knowledge, the daily offices, these formed a pattern that felt permanent, ordained, secure. But this security was fragile, more fragile than the monks of early medieval Europe could have imagined. The monasteries, with their accumulated treasures, their libraries, their gold and silver vessels for communion, represented concentrations of wealth in a largely poor world, and they were, by their nature, poorly defended. Monks were not warriors. Their walls, if they had walls at all, were meant more for defining sacred space than for military defense. Let us travel now to one particular monastery on one particular coast in one particular year. We're moving to Lindisfarne, a tidal island off the northeastern coast of England in the Kingdom of Northumbria. The year is 793 CE. What happens here will send shockwaves through Christian Europe and mark the beginning of a new and terrifying age. Lindisfarne, also called Holy Island, sits just offshore, separated from the mainland by a causeway that disappears beneath the waves at high tide. Twice daily, the sea cuts the island off completely. Twice daily, when the waters recede, a path of wet sand emerges, allowing passage on foot or by cart. This isolation was part of the island's appeal for religious purposes. Here, monks could withdraw from the world, could focus on prayer and study without the constant distractions of secular life. The monastery at Lindisfarne had been founded more than a century earlier, in 635, by Saint Aidan, who came from Iona, bringing Celtic Christianity to Northumbria. By the late 8th century, it had become one of the most important religious centers in northern England. The monastery housed perhaps several dozen monks. It possessed a church, living quarters, workshops, a scriptorium where monks copied manuscripts, storerooms, and outbuildings. The monks kept livestock, maintained gardens, fished from the surrounding waters, and welcomed pilgrims who came to venerate the relics of St. Cuthbert, whose body had been interred at Lindisfarne decades earlier. Imagine yourself on the island on an early summer morning in 793. The dawn is cool and grey, as dawns often are in this northern place. Mist drifts across the wet sand of the causeway. Seabirds cry overhead. Gulls, terns, kittiwakes, their voices harsh and wild. The smell of the sea pervades everything, salt and kelp and the peculiar mineral scent of tidal flats. The monastery buildings are modest, constructed primarily of wood with some stonework. The church, the most substantial structure, has been recently rebuilt in stone, a sign of the monastery's growing prosperity. Inside, preparations are underway for the morning office. Monks move through their familiar routines, lighting candles, arranging themselves in their stalls, preparing to chant the psalms. Nothing in this morning suggests what is coming. The sea is relatively calm, the wind moderate. A few fishing boats from the mainland might be visible in the distance. The monks have no reason for alarm. This island, this monastery, has existed peacefully for more than 150 years. Generations of monks have lived and died here, their lives ordered by prayer and work, their days following the eternal rhythm of the religious calendar. But out on the grey water, beyond the morning mist, ships are approaching. Long, narrow ships with high prows carved in the shapes of beasts. Ships powered by both sail and oars, capable of moving with devastating speed. Ships carrying warriors from across the North Sea, from the fjords and coastlands of Norway and Denmark, places whose very names are unknown to the monks of Lindisfarne. These are Vikings, though that word doesn't quite exist yet in its later meaning. To the monks, they will be simply heathens, pagans, barbarians from the sea. The raiders themselves probably don't think of their action as the beginning of an age. They are simply seeking plunder, following rumors of wealthy, undefended monasteries along the coasts of Britain and Ireland. The ships approach quickly when the monks finally spot them. There's a moment of confusion. Ships are not uncommon in these waters. Perhaps these are traders, emissaries from another kingdom, but something in the manner of their approach, in the speed and purposefulness of their movement, triggers alarm. The monks have no real defense. They are not soldiers. Most have never held weapons. Their protection has always been the assumed sanctity of their religious calling, the belief that surely no one would dare attack a house of God. This belief, so deeply held, so fundamental to their understanding of the world, is about to be shattered. The Vikings beach their ships and come ashore with terrifying efficiency. These are experienced raiders, men who have attacked settlements before, who know how to move quickly and ruthlessly. They carry axes, swords, spears. They wear whatever armor they can afford: leather jerkins, mail shirts for the wealthier among them, iron helmets. Their appearance must seem demonic to the monks who watch them approach. What happens next unfolds with brutal speed. The raiders sweep through the monastery, meeting almost no resistance. Some monks try to flee, running toward the church or toward the causeway, desperate to reach the mainland. The tide is wrong. The causeway is submerged, the way cut off. Others remain frozen in shock, unable to comprehend what is happening. Still others stand their ground, perhaps believing that divine protection will shield them, that these attackers will stop when they realize they are in a holy place. The Vikings do not stop. They are not Christians. The symbols that mean sanctity to the monks mean nothing to these raiders. A golden crucifix is simply gold. A jeweled gospel cover is simply valuable. The monks themselves are obstacles at best, potential slaves at worst. Lives end quickly. The violence of that morning is a horror that the sources struggle to convey, and we will not dwell on specific details. What matters is the outcome. Monks killed, some within the church itself, breaking what had seemed an inviolable sanctuary. The raiders show no deference to the holy site. They ransack the church, tearing down ornaments, smashing what they cannot carry, loading the portable treasures onto their ships. The manuscripts, those laboriously copied books we discussed earlier, likely hold little interest for the raiders. Vellum and ink have no value in the Norse trade networks. Some books might be destroyed in the chaos, their pages scattered, their bindings torn apart in the search for hidden valuables. Others might survive, overlooked in the general destruction. The knowledge preserved through generations of scribal labor faces sudden, violent erasure. The Vikings work quickly. They know they are vulnerable while ashore, that any organized resistance could trap them. They load their ships with plunder, gold, silver, communion vessels, jeweled book covers stripped from their manuscripts, fine fabrics, any portable wealth they can seize. Some monks are taken captive to be sold as slaves in Scandinavian markets. Others are left dead or wounded among the ruins of their monastery. And then, as quickly as they came, the raiders depart. They push their ships back into the surf, mount the rowing benches, and pull for open water. The raid has lasted perhaps a few hours, no more. By midday, the Viking ships are disappearing into the grey distance, leaving behind a scene of devastation. Those monks who survived emerge from hiding places, from corners where they cowered in terror. They find their brothers dead or dying. The church has been profaned, its treasures stolen, its sanctity violated. Buildings smolder where the raiders set fires. The carefully ordered world of the monastery has been reduced to chaos and grief. Word of the attack spreads with remarkable speed, traveling along the networks of communication that connect monasteries and churches across Europe. Within weeks, scholars and churchmen hundreds of miles away are writing about Lindisfarne. Their letters and chronicles convey shock, horror, and a sense that something fundamental has shifted in the world. Alcuin of York, one of the great scholars of the age, advisor to Charlemagne, wrote a letter expressing his anguish. Never before has such terror appeared in Britain as we have now suffered from a pagan race. The heathens poured out the blood of saints around the altar and trampled on the bodies of saints in the temple of God, like dung in the streets. Alcuin's response is worth pausing over. He describes the attack in terms of divine punishment, wondering what sins have brought this calamity upon Christian Britain. This interpretation, that the Vikings are instruments of God's wrath, sent to punish wickedness, becomes a common response to Viking raids. It's a way of making sense of senseless violence, of maintaining belief in a divinely ordered universe, even when that universe seems to have descended into chaos. The attack on Lindisfarne is not actually the first Viking raid on Western Europe. There had been earlier, smaller raids on the English coast and on Ireland. But Lindisfarne captures attention because of the monastery's prominence, because of the completeness of the violation, and because of the powerful written responses from scholars like Alcuin. This raid becomes, in historical memory, the symbolic beginning of the Viking Age. And it is only the beginning. The success of the Lindisfarne raid encourages further attacks. The Vikings have discovered that the coastlines of Britain and Ireland are full of wealthy, poorly defended targets. Monasteries like Lindisfarne sit on islands and promontories, accessible by ship, loaded with treasures, occupied by non-combatants. From the Viking perspective, these are almost ideal targets. The following year, 794, Vikings attacked the monasteries at Jarrow and Monkwearmouth. In 795, they strike Iona, the mother house of Celtic Christianity in Britain, founded by Saint Columba. They return to Iona in 802 and again in 806, burning buildings and killing monks. The pattern repeats across the Irish sea coast, along the Scottish Islands, down the Irish coastline. Monasteries that have existed for generations face sudden extinction. The raids force fundamental changes in how monasteries operate. Some are abandoned, the monks fleeing to inland locations. Others are fortified, though walls and ditches offer limited protection against seaborne raiders who can strike at will and withdraw before any organized defense arrives. Some monasteries begin burying their treasures, hiding valuables in the ground against the possibility of attack. Archaeologists still occasionally discover these hidden hoards, silver and gold objects buried in haste and never recovered. The psychological impact is perhaps even greater than the physical damage. The monastic world had felt secure, protected by the sanctity of religious dedication. The Vikings demonstrate that this protection is illusory. Nowhere is truly safe. The sea, which had seemed a barrier, a moat protecting island Britain from continental troubles, is revealed as a highway for attackers. Imagine yourself as a monk in a coastal monastery in the decades after Lindisfarne. You go about your daily routine, copying manuscripts in the scriptorium, attending the offices, working in the garden. But now, there's always fear. Every sail on the horizon might be raiders. Every summer brings anxiety, because summers are when the Vikings come, when the weather allows long sea voyages. You might sleep poorly, starting awake at strange sounds, wondering if this is the night the attack comes. The manuscripts you copy take on new poignancy. You're preserving knowledge in a world that increasingly seems bent on destruction. Each book completed is a small victory against chaos. And you're aware, in a way earlier generations of scribes were not, how fragile this preservation is. A single raid can destroy a library that took centuries to assemble. The Vikings who attacked Lindisfarne and other monasteries are not, from their own perspective, monsters or demons. They are farmers and craftsmen from Scandinavia, seeking wealth and opportunity through raiding. The harsh climate and limited arable land of their homeland encourages outward expansion. Their shipbuilding technology gives them mobility. Their warrior culture values courage and success in battle. Raiding is an accepted, even prestigious activity in Norse society. But to the victims, these distinctions mean nothing. The Vikings are destroyers, heathens who show no respect for Christian sanctity, who kill without mercy, who reduce years of patient work to ruins in a matter of hours. The Lindisfarne raid of 793 inaugurates what will be more than 2 centuries of Viking activity in Western Europe. The raids will intensify, growing larger and more organized. Small raiding parties will be replaced by great armies that conquer and settle entire kingdoms. The Vikings will establish Dublin as a trading city, will rule parts of England, will settle Normandy in France. Their influence will reshape the political and cultural landscape of medieval Europe. But on that morning in 793, none of this is knowable. On that morning, there is only the shock, the violence, the overturned world. The monks of Lindisfarne, those who survive, are left to bury their dead, to salvage what can be salvaged, to make sense of a catastrophe that seems to have no sense. The monastery at Lindisfarne will eventually recover, will continue to function for generations more, but it will never be quite the same. The innocence is gone, replaced by wariness and fear. The monastery that once felt secure in its island isolation now feels exposed, vulnerable to the sea that both sustains and threatens it. As you rest tonight, comfortable in your bed, protected by modern security and law, you might think about those monks, about the sudden violence that shattered their world, about the terror of seeing strangers emerge from the sea, armed and hostile, about the incomprehensible cruelty of having their sacred space violated, their brothers killed, their life's work destroyed or stolen. The Lindisfarne raid reminds us that security can be fragile, that the order we build can be disrupted by forces we don't anticipate. It reminds us too of resilience. The monastic world did not end with Lindisfarne. It adapted, survived, eventually flourished again. Knowledge was preserved, not perfectly but well enough. The manuscripts continued to be copied, the prayers continued to be said, the rhythm of religious life continued, even in a more dangerous world. The terror of that June morning in 793 fades with distance, softened by time into historical fact. But for those who lived through it, the terror was immediate and overwhelming. The world changed that day, and the echoes of that change rippled across Europe, shaping the medieval world in ways the monks of Lindisfarne could never have foreseen. Let these thoughts settle in your mind as we prepare to move forward. We've witnessed sudden violence breaking into peaceful routine. Now we'll turn to something quieter but no less remarkable: the intricate beauty of the manuscripts that monks like those at Lindisfarne created and protected, sometimes at the cost of their lives. From the violence and destruction we've just witnessed, we turn now to something that survived such threats. Not just survived, but endured to become one of the most celebrated artistic achievements of the medieval world. We move from the terror of raiding and loss to the quiet mystery of creation and preservation. The Book of Kells sits today behind protective glass in the library of Trinity College, Dublin. Thousands of visitors file past it each year, pausing to gaze at pages that were created more than 1,200 years ago. But imagine yourself not as a modern visitor, but as someone encountering this manuscript in its own time. In the dim light of a monastery church, the book resting on an altar or lectern opened to reveal pages that seem to shimmer with color and complexity. This is an illuminated manuscript, a term that refers to books decorated with gold, silver, and brilliant pigments that catch and reflect light, making the pages appear to glow, to be illuminated from within. But the Book of Kells is not simply an illuminated manuscript. It is, by common agreement among scholars and art historians, one of the supreme examples of the art form, perhaps the supreme example. To look at its pages is to confront a level of intricacy and beauty that strains comprehension. The book contains the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, written in Latin on vellum pages. In physical terms, it is a relatively large manuscript, its pages measuring roughly 13 inches tall by 10 inches wide. But these measurements convey nothing of what makes the book remarkable. What matters is what appears on those pages. Text, certainly, but also images and decorations of such elaborate complexity that modern viewers, accustomed to visual abundance, still find them overwhelming. Let us begin with the text itself, though in this manuscript, text and decoration are so intertwined that separating them feels artificial. The script is insular majuscule, a style of writing that developed in Irish and British monasteries. The letters are carefully formed, each one distinct and clear, but clarity gives way to ornament at crucial points. The opening words of gospel passages, the names of Christ and other holy figures, major initials, these become opportunities for elaborate decoration. Consider the Chai Row page, perhaps the most famous page in the manuscript. The Chai Row is a Christogram, a symbol representing Christ formed from the first two letters of his name in Greek, X, Chi, and P, RHO. In the Book of Kells, these letters occupy an entire page. Their forms expanded and elaborated until they become landscapes of decoration. Imagine yourself examining this page closely, your eyes adjusting to the complexity. The large Chi, the X-shaped letter, dominates the composition. But as you look, you realize that what appeared at first to be simple lines are actually ribbons, interlaced in intricate patterns. These ribbons twist and loop, creating knots of impossible complexity. Your eye follows one ribbon, tracing its path through the maze of lines, only to lose it as it disappears behind another strand, emerges elsewhere, doubles back on itself. The spaces between the ribbons are filled with other decorations. Smaller spirals, dots arranged in patterns, geometric shapes, and, surprisingly, tiny figures. Animals appear in the margins and within the letter forms. Cats, mice, otters, dogs, birds. Some of these animals seem purely decorative. Others interact with each other in ways that suggest narrative or symbolism. Two cats watch a pair of mice nibbling on a communion wafer. Is this simply whimsical decoration, or does it carry theological meaning about vigilance and temptation? The colors strike you immediately. Brilliant blues, rich purples, warm yellows, deep reds, vibrant greens. These pigments were expensive and difficult to produce. The blue likely came from lapis lazuli, a semi-precious stone imported from Afghanistan, ground into powder and mixed with a binding medium. The red might be derived from lead oxide or from kermes, an insect that lives on Mediterranean oak trees. The purple came from folium, a plant-based dye. The yellow from orpiment, a mineral containing arsenic that had to be handled carefully during preparation. Gold appears throughout the manuscript, not as paint, but as actual gold leaf, thin sheets of hammered gold applied to the vellum surface. The gold catches light at different angles, creating a shimmering effect. In candlelight or lamplight, the kind of illumination the monks themselves would have used, these golden passages would have seemed to glow with inner fire. The application of gold leaf required considerable skill. The vellum had to be prepared with a sticky substance called gesso, which held the gold in place. The gold itself was so thin it could tear with a breath of air. Once applied, it was burnished, rubbed with a smooth tool to make it adhere firmly and to bring out its shine. This process demanded patience, a steady hand, and years of experience. But technique, however impressive, doesn't fully explain the Book of Kells. What elevates this manuscript to its unique status is the level of detail, the density of decoration, the sheer ambition of the artistic vision. Every page that contains illumination, and many pages do, represents hours or days of painstaking work. Some pages must have taken weeks. The Chi-Rho page alone, with its thousands of individual elements, its intricate knotwork, its tiny figures and decorative motifs, might have occupied a skilled illuminator for months. Who created this extraordinary book? The honest answer is that we don't know. The manuscript contains no colophon identifying its makers, no signatures, no contemporary documentation that would settle the question. What we have instead are theories, educated guesses based on style, historical context, and fragmentary evidence. The traditional attribution, reflected in the manuscript's name, is to the monastery at Kells in County Meath, Ireland. But modern scholarship suggests a more complex origin. The style of the illumination, the interlaced patterns, the spiral motifs, the animal decorations, shows strong connections to earlier manuscripts produced at Iona, the monastery on a small island off the west coast of Scotland. Imagine Iona in the late 8th century. This is before the Viking raids we discussed earlier have reached their full intensity, but not before they've begun. The monastery at Iona, founded by Saint Columba in the 6th century, is one of the major centers of Celtic Christianity. It houses a community of monks, a scriptorium, workshops for metalwork and other crafts. It's possible, many scholars believe probable, that work on the Book of Kells began at Iona. The Viking attack on Iona in 806, which killed 68 monks, may have prompted the decision to relocate some of the community to Ireland, to the monastery at Kells. If work on the manuscript was already underway, it would have been transported carefully, perhaps hidden in a leather satchel, carried by monks fleeing across the sea to relative safety. The work might have continued at Kells, with different illuminators adding their contributions over time. This theory, Iona as the place of origin, Kells as the place of completion, remains just that, a theory. But it fits the available evidence and explains certain features of the manuscript, including why it appears unfinished. Some pages are fully illuminated, while others contain only the basic text. Some decorative schemes seem to have been planned but never executed. This pattern suggests interruption, perhaps the chaos of the Viking raids, perhaps the death of key artisans before the work could be completed. What we can say with more certainty is that multiple hands worked on the manuscript. Scholars have identified at least 3, possibly 4 different illuminators based on stylistic analysis. Each brought their own approach to the decoration, their own preferences for certain motifs and color combinations. One illuminator favored elaborate interlace patterns, another excelled at animal forms, a third had a particular skill with human figures. This collaborative nature of the work reminds us that medieval manuscripts were not typically solo productions. A major illuminated gospel book required the cooperation of many skilled individuals. Some prepared the vellum, stretching and scraping calfskin to create smooth, durable pages. Others mixed pigments, grinding minerals and combining them with binders to create paints. Scribes wrote the text, following careful guidelines to ensure consistency. Illuminators added the decorations, working from designs that might have been sketched first in lead point or silver point. Bookbinders assembled the finished pages into a coherent volume, attaching them to wooden boards covered in leather or fabric. The Book of Kells represents the pinnacle of this collaborative process. Every skill, every technique available to Celtic manuscript makers appears in this book, pushed to its absolute limits. The result is a manuscript that transcends its function as a book and becomes something closer to a devotional object, a material expression of faith and dedication. Let us consider the interlace patterns more closely because they are central to the book's aesthetic and to Celtic art more generally. Interlace, the weaving together of ribbons or bands in complex knots, appears in Irish metalwork, in stone crosses, in manuscripts, but nowhere does it achieve the complexity visible in the Book of Kells. Imagine trying to create one of these patterns yourself. You would need to plan carefully, mapping out the design before putting pen to vellum. Some scholars believe the illuminators used compasses and straight edges to create the underlying geometric frameworks. Others suggest they worked more freehand, relying on practice, skill, and visual judgment. Either way, the task is formidable. A single interlace knot might involve 4, 6, 8 or more ribbons, each passing over and under the others in a sequence that must be maintained consistently throughout the pattern. An error, a ribbon passing under when it should go over, creates a flaw that disrupts the entire composition, and these knots don't exist in isolation. They connect to other knots, forming fields of continuous interlace that can cover large areas of a page. The mental discipline required to execute these patterns approaches the discipline needed for advanced mathematics. You must hold complex three-dimensional relationships in your mind while working on a two-dimensional surface. You must maintain concentration over hours of detailed work, never allowing your attention to slip, never making the small error that would require scraping away the pigment and starting again. Why this obsession with interlace? What did these patterns mean to their creators? The answers, like so much else about the Book of Kells, remain partially hidden. Celtic art had used interlace for centuries before the Book of Kells was created. The patterns appear in earlier manuscripts, in metalwork like the Tara brooch, in stone carvings. There's a continuity of tradition, a vocabulary of forms passed down from master to apprentice. Some scholars see theological symbolism in the interlace. The endless loops with no clear beginning or end might represent eternity, the infinite nature of God. The way individual ribbons weave together might symbolize the interconnection of all creation or the unity of the Godhead. The complexity itself might be a form of meditation, an attempt to create visual analogues for divine mysteries that cannot be fully grasped by human minds. But we should be cautious about reading too much specific symbolism into every decorative choice. It's possible that the illuminators simply found these patterns beautiful, that they enjoyed the challenge of creating increasingly complex knots. That aesthetic pleasure was itself a sufficient motivation. Beauty in service of God, beauty as prayer, beauty as an offering. These were respectable motivations in the medieval world. The animal figures scattered through the manuscript invite similar questions about meaning. Celtic art loved animal forms, stylized beasts that appear in metalwork, in stone carving, in manuscripts. The Book of Kells contains cats, dogs, mice, otters, birds, lions, serpents, and creatures that defy easy identification. Hybrids and fantasies drawn from imagination rather than observation. Some of these animals clearly carry symbolic weight. The lion represents Christ, based on biblical imagery and patristic tradition. The serpent might represent evil, temptation, the devil. Birds could symbolize souls, freedom, divine inspiration. But other animals seem more ambiguous. Those cats watching mice, are they symbols of vigilance or just charming decorative touches? The otter holding a fish in its mouth, does it represent Christian symbolism? Or did the illuminator simply remember watching otters in a stream near the monastery? Human figures also appear, though less frequently than animals. The evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are depicted in portrait form, each shown with the symbols traditionally associated with them. Matthew has a man or angel, Mark a lion, Luke an ox, John an eagle. These figures are rendered in a style very different from classical Roman art. They are flat, frontal with large eyes and stylized features. Proportions are not naturalistic. Heads are large, bodies simplified. This style was sometimes dismissed by earlier art historians as primitive, as evidence that medieval artists had lost the technical skills of classical antiquity. But this interpretation misses the point. The illuminators of the Book of Kells were not trying to create naturalistic portraits. They were creating icons, sacred images meant to direct the viewer's thoughts towards spiritual realities rather than physical appearances. The style is a choice, not a limitation. The full-page illustrations and elaborate initial letters serve to mark important moments in the text. The opening of each gospel receives special treatment. The genealogy of Christ at the beginning of Matthew's Gospel is accompanied by extraordinary decoration. The arrest of Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane receives an illustration that shows Christ flanked by groups of armed men, the composition dense with figures and symbolic details. These images reward extended contemplation. Look at any one element, a figure, a decorative border, a field of interlace, and you can study it for long minutes, noticing details you missed at first glance. The Book of Kells offers visual richness that exceeds the capacity of casual viewing. It demands time, patience, and careful attention. In this way, it mirrors the spiritual practice of contemplative prayer, a slow, deep engagement with sacred material that unfolds its meanings gradually. The making of the pigments deserves further consideration, because the colors in the Book of Kells remain vibrant after more than 12 centuries. This durability is not accidental. It results from careful selection of materials and skillful preparation. Imagine yourself in the monastery workshop where pigments are prepared. This is delicate, sometimes dangerous work. Lapis lazuli, source of the brilliant blue, must be ground to a fine powder using a mortar and pestle. Too coarse, and the pigment won't apply smoothly. Too fine, and the color loses intensity. The grinding takes hours, a meditative repetition of circular motions. Orpiment, the yellow pigment, contains arsenic. Grinding it releases fine particles that can be inhaled or absorbed through the skin. Prolonged exposure leads to illness, sometimes death. Yet scribes and illuminators worked with these materials regularly, accepting the risks as part of their craft. Red lead, another common pigment, also poses health hazards. It's toxic if ingested and can cause chronic health problems with repeated exposure. The illuminators would have known these materials were dangerous. They could observe the effects on their own health and the health of their colleagues, but the desire to create beauty, to serve God through art, outweighed the personal risks. Once ground, the pigments must be mixed with binders to create workable paint. Egg white, gum arabic from acacia trees, and animal glues were common choices. Each binder affects how the pigment behaves, its transparency, its flow, how quickly it dries, how well it adheres to vellum. Learning these properties took years of experience, of trial and error, of watching masters at work and gradually mastering the techniques yourself. The application of paint required brushes, and these too demanded careful preparation. The finest brushes were made from squirrel hair or from the winter coat of certain other animals, where the fur is soft but resilient. The illuminator would trim the hairs to create a fine point, bind them with thread to a hollow quill or wooden handle, and use these brushes to apply pigment with precision. Consider the scale of detail in the Book of Kells. Some elements are so small they can barely be seen without magnification. Tiny spirals, minute dots, hair-thin lines of gold. These details push the limits of what the human hand can execute and what the human eye can perceive. The illuminators must have worked in the best available light, probably near windows during daylight hours, their eyes inches from the page, their breathing controlled to avoid disturbing the paint or gold leaf. The toll this work took on eyesight must have been severe. We've discussed already how scribes suffered from eye strain and failing vision. Illuminators faced even greater challenges, working with fine brushes and intricate details for hours daily. Many must have ended their careers partially blind, their eyes exhausted by decades of close work in imperfect light. Yet they persisted. The evidence is in the pages that survive, in the extraordinary level of care and skill evident in every illumination. These were people who believed their work mattered, who found meaning in creating beauty for God's glory, who were willing to sacrifice their health and eyesight in pursuit of artistic and spiritual excellence. The Book of Kells remained at the monastery in Kells for centuries after its creation. It was used liturgically, displayed on special occasions, perhaps read from during services. Its presence in the monastery was a source of prestige, evidence of the community's artistic and spiritual sophistication. But manuscripts, even precious ones, were vulnerable. In 1006, according to historical records, the Book of Kells was stolen from the monastery church. The theft involved the book's elaborate cover, which was presumably made of gold and silver, decorated with jewels and precious metalwork. Thieves were interested in this cover, not in the vellum pages inside. The book was recovered months later, buried in the ground, its cover gone, but the pages intact. This incident reminds us that what we value in the Book of Kells, the illuminations, the artistry, the spiritual expression, was not necessarily what medieval people valued most highly. The gold and jeweled cover represented immediate convertible wealth. The pages, while recognized as beautiful and important, were secondary to the monetary value of the metalwork. The book survived the theft, survived the centuries, survived the dissolution of the monasteries, survived wars and political upheaval. In the 17th century, it came into the possession of Trinity College, Dublin, where it has remained ever since. It has been rebound several times, the original binding long lost. Some pages have been damaged, trimmed, or lost over the centuries, but the core of the manuscript survives, a connection to the distant past, a window into the artistic and spiritual world of medieval Ireland and Scotland. When you look at photographs of pages from the Book of Kells, and high-quality digital images are now available online, you're seeing the work of human hands from more than 1,200 years ago. Those illuminators who ground pigments and mixed colors, who carefully formed letters and drew intricate knots, who spent months or years creating these pages. They're gone, their names mostly unknown, their lives unrecorded. But their work remains, speaking across the centuries in a language of color and form that requires no translation. The mysteries remain. We don't know exactly who created the manuscript, or precisely where, or precisely when. We don't understand all the symbolic meanings encoded in the decorations. We can't fully explain why this particular manuscript achieved such extraordinary elaboration, while other contemporary gospel books, though beautiful, stopped short of this level of complexity. But perhaps the mystery is part of the appeal. The Book of Kells invites contemplation precisely because it doesn't yield all its secrets easily. Each viewing reveals new details, new patterns, new connections. The illuminations function like visual prayers, drawing the viewer into deeper engagement with the sacred text they accompany. As you drift towards sleep tonight, you might imagine those illuminators bent over their work in the scriptorium at Iona or Kells. The light from a window falls across their hands. A brush, loaded with brilliant blue pigment, moves across the vellum with careful precision. Another loop in an endless interlace pattern takes form. A tiny cat appears in a margin watching a mouse. Gold leaf is applied, burnished, made to shine. The work continues, day after day, season after season. The illuminators grow older, their eyes weaken, their hands become less steady. But the work continues. And eventually, after years of collaborative effort, after countless hours of concentrated labor, the book is complete, or as complete as it will ever be. It rests on a shelf in the monastery library or on a stand in the church, its pages full of color and complexity, its presence a testament to human dedication and divine inspiration. The rhythm of creation, like the rhythm of copying we explored earlier, has its own kind of peace. The repetitive motions, the familiar techniques, the gradual accumulation of detail, these create a meditative state, a form of prayer expressed through art rather than words. The illuminators of the Book of Kells were monks first, artists second. Their work was an offering, a form of devotion, a way of serving God through beauty. And that beauty endures, outlasting the hands that created it, outlasting the monastery where it was made, outlasting kingdoms and cultures. The Book of Kells sits in its climate-controlled case in Dublin, and people come from around the world to spend a few moments in its presence, to marvel at what human beings could create with pen and brush and pigment, with patience and skill and faith. We've moved through time and place, from the scriptorium to the Viking raid, from the artistic mysteries of illuminated manuscripts to another kind of mystery, another kind of labor. Now we arrive in 12th century Paris, to a world of learning and debate, of young minds being shaped by rigorous intellectual training, of knowledge being organized and transmitted in new ways. The century is the 1100s, a period historians sometimes call the 12th century Renaissance. Europe is experiencing a revival of learning, an influx of new texts from the Islamic world and Byzantium, a growing sophistication in philosophy and theology. Cities are expanding, trade is increasing, and with this economic growth comes an appetite for education. The old monastic schools, focused primarily on training monks, are being supplemented and sometimes eclipsed by cathedral schools that teach a broader range of students. Notre-Dame Cathedral in Paris houses one of the most prestigious of these schools. The cathedral itself is still under construction during much of this period. That soaring Gothic structure we know today is being built stone by stone, its famous towers and flying buttresses not yet complete. But the school exists already, occupying buildings adjacent to the rising cathedral, drawing students from across Europe to study under masters whose reputations spread far beyond Paris. Imagine yourself as a young student arriving in Paris for the first time. You might be 15 or 16 years old, though students come at various ages. Perhaps you're the younger son of a noble family, destined for the church, since you will not inherit lands. Or you might be from a merchant family, your father prosperous enough to afford the cost of your education. Or possibly you're from humbler origins, but you've shown promise in your basic schooling, and a local priest or patron has agreed to support your studies. The journey to Paris has been long. You've traveled on foot, by cart, perhaps by riverboat along the Seine. Paris impresses you immediately with its size and bustle. This is a real city, larger and more crowded than anywhere you've known. The streets near the cathedral are narrow and winding, lined with workshops and houses. The air carries the smell of wood smoke, of cooking, of the river, of the inevitable odors of a medieval city where sanitation is rudimentary. You find lodging in a house that takes in students, sharing a room with several others. The accommodations are basic: straw mattresses on wooden frames, a single window, limited heating. You'll take your meals with your landlady or at taverns near the school. Your expenses are carefully calculated, the money provided by family or patron sufficient for modest living but not luxury. As you lie in your comfortable bed tonight, in your heated room, with modern conveniences surrounding you, you might feel grateful for the distance that separates you from the medieval world. You don't have to spend hours hunched over a manuscript in inadequate light. You don't have to fear raiders from the sea. You don't have to grind toxic pigments by hand or memorize texts in a language not your own. The past is past, and there's comfort in that. But perhaps you might also feel a thread of connection to those distant people. They too lay down to sleep at day's end, their bodies tired, their minds still processing the day's experiences. They too found moments of satisfaction in work completed, in problems solved, in beauty created or knowledge acquired. They too lived lives that mattered, that left traces we can still observe and appreciate. The manuscripts they copied sit in libraries and museums now, their vellum pages carefully preserved, their text still readable after centuries. The illuminations they created still glow with color and gold. The buildings they constructed or learned in still stand, monuments to faith and craft. The methods of thought they developed still influence how we approach questions of philosophy and theology. The past they inhabited shapes the present we occupy. As sleep approaches, let these images settle in your mind. The scribe at his desk, forming letters with patient precision. The illuminator applying gold leaf to a page, watching it catch the light. The student in 12th century Paris, walking home through narrow streets after a day of intense disputation. The rhythm of their lives, ordered, purposeful, difficult, meaningful. Medieval people understood something about time that we sometimes forget. They knew that important things take years to accomplish. A manuscript copied, an illumination completed, an education finished. These required sustained effort over long periods. Instant gratification was not an option. Success meant dedication, endurance, and faith that the work would eventually be completed, even if you didn't live to see the final result. The cathedral at Notre-Dame, rising stone by stone during the 12th century, embodies this understanding. Workers and craftsmen labored on a structure they knew they wouldn't see finished. They placed stones that their grandchildren's grandchildren would see in a completed building, yet they worked with care and skill, trusting that their contribution mattered, that they were part of something larger than their individual lives. This patience, this long view, this acceptance of delayed rewards, these are gifts the medieval world offers to our hurried age. You don't have to complete everything immediately. Some things are worth years of work. Some achievements require sustained attention over long periods, and that's acceptable. That's even good. The slow accumulation of skill, knowledge, and understanding has its own value, its own satisfaction. Let go now of the urgency that drives modern life. You don't need to accomplish anything more tonight. The world will still be there tomorrow with its demands and deadlines. But right now, in this moment, you can simply rest. Let your breathing slow. Let your muscles relax. Let your mind drift, not worrying about what needs to be done, just acknowledging the day that has passed and the night that now embraces you. The scribes have set down their pens, the illuminators have cleaned their brushes, the students have closed their books and returned to their lodgings. Work continues tomorrow, but for now, there is rest. And you too can rest, secure in the knowledge that some things endure, that human efforts across centuries create connections that time cannot entirely erase, that the past still speaks to us if we listen patiently. Sleep well. The manuscripts are safe in their libraries, the cathedrals still stand, the knowledge has been preserved and transmitted. The rhythm of work and rest, of effort and repose, continues as it has for centuries. You are part of that rhythm now, joining the countless generations who have closed their eyes at day's end, released the day's concerns, and drifted into sleep. May your rest be peaceful. May your dreams be gentle. May you wake refreshed, ready for whatever tomorrow brings. The medieval world we visited tonight recedes into history, but its lessons remain. Patience, dedication, the value of sustained effort, the importance of beauty and learning, the comfort of routine and rhythm. Rest now. Everything is well. The night is quiet. Sleep comes gently, like the slow turning of vellum pages, like the measured chanting of monastic offices, like the patient accumulation of knowledge, letter by letter, day by day, year by year. Good night.